Man forgot about his old friend, but saw him as the director at a job interview. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The elevator climbed slowly toward the 32nd floor, each floor number lighting up with a soft ding that seemed to echo the nervous rhythm of my heartbeat. I adjusted my tie for the 5th time, checking my reflection in the polished steel doors. At 43, I still had most of my hair, though gray had crept in at the temples. The suit was expensive, one of the last remnants from my better days, and I hoped it still projected the confidence I desperately needed to feel. This interview could change everything. After 8 months of unemployment, of watching my savings dwindle and my wife's patience wear thin, Meridian Industries represented hope. A senior marketing position, excellent salary, the kind of job that could put my career back on track and restore some dignity to my life. I'd prepared for weeks, researched the company inside and out, practiced answers to every possible question, even drove by the building twice just to familiarize myself with the route. Nothing could go wrong today. Nothing. The elevator stopped with a gentle bump, and the doors slid open to reveal a sleek reception area. Glass walls, modern furniture, the subtle hum of success that expensive offices always seem to carry. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, looked up as I approached. "David Mitchell for Mr. Chen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Please have a seat. Mr. Chen will be with you shortly." Chen. I'd researched him too, though information had been surprisingly scarce. The company website mentioned he'd been with Meridian for 15 years, worked his way up from an entry-level position, a success story, the kind of executive who understood the value of hard work and determination. Someone who might appreciate my experience, my hunger to prove myself again. I settled into one of the leather chairs and tried to calm my nerves. The morning newspaper lay on the coffee table, but I couldn't focus on the headlines. Instead, my mind wandered to the path that had led me here. 3 years ago, I'd been riding high, senior vice president at Morrison Associates, corner office, secretary, expense account, the whole package. I'd worked 16-hour days to get there, climbed over colleagues when necessary, made the hard decisions that others couldn't stomach. Success required sacrifice, and I'd been willing to make them. Then the market shifted. Our biggest client pulled their account. Budget cuts became layoffs. The company restructured, and suddenly my position was redundant. 22 years of loyalty meant nothing. They gave me 6 months severance and a handshake. I'd been confident it would be temporary. A man with my experience, my track record, companies would be fighting over me. But months turned into seasons. Interviews led to polite rejections, and slowly the awful truth settled in. I was expendable. In an economy full of younger, cheaper alternatives, 43 suddenly felt ancient. "Mr. Mitchell?" I looked up to see the receptionist standing beside me. Had I been lost in thought that long? "Mr. Chen will see you now. Conference room B, just down the hall." I straightened my tie one more time and walked toward the indicated door, my leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. Through the glass walls, I could see the conference room, a long table, several chairs, and a figure sitting at the far end with his back to me. I knocked gently and heard a voice call, "Come in." I opened the door, stepping into the room with what I hoped was confident posture, ready to deliver my practiced opening line. But as the figure at the table turned to face me, the words died in my throat. The face was older, more lined, wearing expensive glasses and a perfectly tailored suit. But the eyes were unmistakable, dark brown, intelligent, with that slight crinkle at the corners that came from years of easy laughter. Eyes I'd known since we were 7 years old. Tommy Chen, my childhood best friend. The boy I'd abandoned when success called my name. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the polished conference table. 25 years collapsed in an instant, and I was 17 again, standing in the hallway of Roosevelt High School, pretending not to know the scholarship kid in the secondhand clothes. "David," Tommy said quietly, his voice carrying none of the surprise I felt. He'd known. Of course he'd known who was coming to this interview. "Please, have a seat." My legs moved automatically, carrying me to the chair across from him. I sat down heavily, my prepared responses scattered like leaves in a hurricane. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I needed this so badly. Tommy leaned back in his chair, studying me with those familiar eyes. He looked good, successful, confident, everything I'd once been. His suit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The watch on his wrist was a Rolex. "It's been a long time," he said. Yes, it has." I managed to find my voice, though it sounded strange to my own ears. Mr. Chen, I had no idea. That I worked here? No, I suppose you wouldn't." His tone was neutral, professional, but there was something underneath it. Not anger exactly, something worse. Disappointment that had aged into indifference. He opened the folder in front of him. My resume, my carefully crafted summary of achievements and experiences. How small it all seemed now. How hollow. "Your resume is impressive," Tommy said, scanning the pages. "Morrison Associates, Senior Vice President. That's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you. Tell me, how did you hear about this position?" The question was standard, one I'd prepared for, but sitting across from Tommy Chen, the boy who'd shared his lunch with me when I forgot mine, who'd spent countless afternoons helping me with math homework, who'd believed we'd be friends forever, it felt impossible to give corporate answers. "Through a headhunter," I said finally. "The position seemed like a good fit for my experience." Tommy nodded, making a note in the folder. "And what draws you to Meridian Industries specifically?" I launched into my prepared response about market leadership and innovative approaches, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. Tommy listened politely, occasionally nodding, his expression giving nothing away. But I knew him, had known him better than anyone, once upon a time. I could see the way his jaw tightened slightly when I mentioned building dynamic teams. Could catch the fleeting shadow that crossed his face when I spoke about loyalty and dedication. He remembered. Of course he remembered. The memories I'd buried for decades came flooding back with brutal clarity. Tommy and me at 8 years old, building elaborate Lego cities in his cramped apartment above his parents' restaurant. His mother always insisted I stay for dinner, ladling extra helpings onto my plate, despite the fact that food was clearly scarce in their household. Tommy at 12, defending me from the 8th grade bullies who'd cornered me behind the gym. He was smaller than them, but fierce in that quiet way that made older kids think twice about pushing too hard. Tommy at 15, staying up all night to help me finish the chemistry project I'd procrastinated on. We'd worked in his kitchen while his parents prepared for the morning rush, the smell of noodles and garlic mixing with the sharp scent of laboratory chemicals. Tommy at 16, getting his first job washing dishes at the restaurant to help his parents with rent. Coming to school exhausted but never complaining, never asking for special consideration from teachers who couldn't understand why his homework was sometimes late. And Tommy at 17, standing in the hallway outside Advanced Placement English, watching me pretend not to see him. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd been talking to Miranda Westfield, the daughter of one of the city's most prominent lawyers. She was beautiful, popular, everything a 17-year-old boy could want, and she'd been showing interest in me. David Mitchell, whose father was a successful accountant, whose family lived in the right neighborhood, who had the right clothes and the right prospects. Tommy had approached us between classes, probably wanting to compare notes on the Gatsby essay that was due next period. But before he could speak, Miranda had looked him up and down with that particular brand of teenage cruelty that cuts deeper than any blade. "Do you know this guy?" she'd ask me, her voice carrying just enough disdain to make her meaning clear. I'd looked at Tommy, my best friend, my brother in everything but blood, and made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Not really," I'd said. "He's in a few of my classes." The lie had hung in the air between us like smoke. Tommy's face had gone very still, his eyes searching mine for some explanation, some sign that I didn't mean it. But I'd already turned away, already chosen the path that led away from loyalty and toward what I thought was a better future. David? Tommy's voice brought me back to the present. I realized I'd been silent for several long moments, lost in memories I'd spent decades trying to forget. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I asked about your management philosophy. How do you handle relationships with colleagues and subordinates? The irony was so sharp it was almost physically painful. I cleared my throat, trying to summon some semblance of professionalism. I believe in clear communication and mutual respect, I said. Building trust is essential to any successful working relationship. Tommy made another note, his pen scratching softly against the paper. When he looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not the neutral professionalism he'd maintained so far, but something more personal, more dangerous. Trust, he repeated. That's interesting. In your experience, what happens when trust is broken? How does a leader rebuild those relationships? I felt sweat beginning to form at my hairline. This wasn't about the job anymore. This was about something much more painful. Well, I said carefully, I think it depends on the circumstances. Sometimes trust can be rebuilt through consistent actions over time. Sometimes the damage is too severe. Tommy leaned forward slightly. And in your personal experience, David, have you ever been in a situation where you had to rebuild trust with someone? A colleague, perhaps? A friend? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I could deflect, could try to steer the conversation back to safe corporate territory. But something in Tommy's eyes, not anger now, but a quiet kind of pain that had aged into resignation, made me want to tell the truth. Yes, I said quietly, I have. And were you successful? I met his gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. No, I wasn't. Tommy nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. He closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it. Why don't you tell me about it? It wasn't a question, not really. It was a request, maybe even a demand. And suddenly I found myself wanting to explain, needing to explain, even though I knew it was probably too late for explanations. There was someone, I began, my voice rougher than I had expected. In high school, my best friend actually. We'd been close since we were kids, but when I got older, when social status started to matter more, I trailed off, unsure how to continue without making it worse. You abandoned him, Tommy said simply. Yes, because he wasn't useful to your ambitions anymore. It wasn't that calculated, I protested, then stopped. Was I really going to lie to him again? Actually, maybe it was. I was 17 and stupid, and I thought popularity was more important than loyalty. And now? I looked around the conference room, with its expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city I'd spent my entire adult life trying to conquer. Success, I'd learned the hard way, was more fragile than I'd ever imagined. Now I know better, I said, but knowing better doesn't undo the damage. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, studying something beyond my shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost reflective. Do you know what happened after high school, David? I shook my head. I'd made a point of not keeping track of Tommy's life, partly from shame and partly from a deliberate effort to move forward without looking back. I went to state on a full scholarship, worked 30 hours a week at the campus cafeteria to pay for textbooks and expenses, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. He paused, his fingers drumming silently against the table. I was valedictorian, actually. Gave a speech about loyalty and perseverance. The words hit me like individual blows. Valedictorian, full scholarship. Everything he'd achieved while I was coasting through an expensive private college on my father's money. After graduation, I couldn't get interviews at the top firms. My grades were perfect, my recommendations glowing, but somehow I never made it past the first round. Do you know why? I had a sinking feeling I did know, but I remained silent. Because I didn't have connections, didn't have family friends in the right places, didn't have the right background, the right accent, the right zip code on my resume. The things that mattered weren't things you could earn through hard work. Tommy leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my face. So I took an entry-level position here at Meridian, answered phones, filed paperwork, made coffee for executives who were half as intelligent as I was, and I worked. Nights, weekends, holidays. I took every assignment nobody else wanted, solved every problem that seemed impossible. He gestured around the room, encompassing the executive floor, the corner office that was undoubtedly his, the success that radiated from every detail of his appearance. It took 15 years, but I made it. And do you know what I learned along the way? What? That the friends who matter are the ones who stand by you when standing by you costs them something. Everyone else is just, networking. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make him understand the confused priorities of a 17-year-old boy who'd mistaken popularity for happiness. But the words felt inadequate, meaningless in the face of what I'd done and what he'd accomplished despite it. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "It's completely inadequate, but I'm sorry. What I did was inexcusable." Tommy studied me for what felt like an eternity. Then he opened the folder again, scanning my resume one more time. "Tell me about Morrison Associates," he said, his tone shifting back to professional neutrality. "Why did you leave?" The change of subject felt like whiplash, but I followed his lead. "Budget cuts. My position was eliminated. After 22 years. Yes, that must have been difficult, unexpected." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And now you're here, interviewing for a position that would report directly to me." The reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was asking Tommy Chen, the boy I'd betrayed, the man who'd succeeded despite my abandonment, to give me a job, to trust me with his company's success after I'd proven I couldn't be trusted with our friendship. "The irony isn't lost on me," I said quietly. Tommy closed the folder and stood up. For a moment I thought the interview was over, that he was about to escort me out with a polite rejection. Instead, he walked to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" he asked without turning around. "What?" "It wasn't the poverty or the long hours or even the discrimination. It was losing faith in friendship itself, spending years wondering if anyone who claimed to care about me would walk away the moment it became inconvenient." He turned back to face me, and I was struck by how much older he looked in profile, how the success hadn't erased the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "I had trust issues for years, David. Decades. I built this career alone because I'd learned not to depend on anyone else. It's a lonely way to live." I felt something crack inside my chest. "Tommy, I'm not telling you this for sympathy," he interrupted. "I'm telling you because you asked about rebuilding trust, and I wanted you to understand the full cost of what broken trust looks like." He walked back to the table and sat down, fixing me with that steady gaze I remembered from childhood. "This position requires someone who can build and maintain relationships with clients, colleagues, and subordinates. Someone who understands that business success is built on human connections. Someone who can be trusted to represent this company's values." Cornell, my heart sank. I could see where this was heading, and I couldn't blame him for it. "Based on your resume and experience, you're certainly qualified," Tommy continued. "Your track record at Morrison Associates is impressive. Your references speak highly of your technical abilities and strategic thinking." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But this position also requires someone I can trust implicitly. Someone who will be honest with me even when it's difficult, who will stand by their commitments even when it's costly. And I have to ask myself, if you were willing to abandon your closest friend for social advancement, what guarantee do I have that you wouldn't abandon this company for a better offer?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized he was right. Why should he trust me? What evidence had I given him in the last 25 years that I'd changed, that I'd learned from my mistakes? "You're absolutely right," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I don't deserve this job. I don't deserve your trust. I proved that when I was 17, and nothing I've done since then has demonstrated otherwise." Tommy raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a direct admission. But, I continued, I want you to know that walking away from our friendship is the single biggest regret of my life. Not because of where you are now, not because you could help my career, but because you were the best person I knew, and I threw it away for something that turned out to be meaningless. I stood up, straightening my jacket with hands that were surprisingly steady. I don't know if this helps, but I need you to know that I remember everything. The way you shared your lunch when I forgot mine. The hours you spent helping me with homework. The way you stood up for me when I was too scared to stand up for myself. You were a better friend to me than I deserved, and I've thought about that every day for 25 years. Tommy's expression had shifted, the professional mask slipping slightly to reveal something more complex underneath. I became successful, Tommy, but I became someone I don't particularly like. Someone who values achievement over relationships, who treats people as stepping stones instead of human beings. The kind of person who abandons their best friend in a high school hallway. I moved toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. You asked if I'd ever successfully rebuilt trust with someone. The answer is no, because I never tried. I was too ashamed, too proud, too convinced that some mistakes can't be forgiven. Maybe I was right about that, but I want you to know that if I could go back and change one thing about my life, it wouldn't be my career choices or my investments or any of the decisions that led to me needing this job. It would be that moment in the hallway when I chose popularity over friendship. Tommy had remained silent throughout my speech, his expression unreadable. Now he stood up slowly, walking around the table until he was standing directly in front of me. Sit down, David. Tommy, it's okay. I understand. Sit down. The quiet authority in his voice reminded me of the boy who'd faced down bullies twice his size. I returned to my chair, uncertain what was happening but willing to follow his lead. Tommy sat down across from me again, but this time there was something different in his posture, something less formal and more personal. Do you remember, he said quietly, the night before our senior year started? We were sitting on the roof of my parents' restaurant, talking about the future. I did remember. It had been one of the last times we'd really talked, just the two of us, before the social pressures of senior year had driven a wedge between us. You said you were scared, Tommy continued. Scared that you weren't smart enough to get into a good college? Scared that you'd disappoint your father? Scared that you'd end up ordinary? The memory was vivid now, painted in the warm glow of late summer and the smell of cooking oil from the restaurant below. I told you that fear was normal, that everyone felt that way sometimes, and you said something I never forgot. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. You said that the worst thing about fear was how it made you do things you knew were wrong, how it turned decent people into cowards. Tommy leaned forward, his elbows on the table. I think about that conversation a lot, David, because what happened between us wasn't really about social status or ambition. It was about fear. You were terrified of being left behind, of not measuring up, of not becoming the person you thought you needed to be. And that fear made you do something you knew was wrong. I felt tears threatening for the first time since entering the room. That doesn't excuse it. No, Tommy agreed. It doesn't excuse it, but it helps me understand it. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. I'm going to tell you something, David, and I need you to listen carefully. Are you listening? I nodded. The position you're interviewing for? I've been trying to fill it for 8 months. I've interviewed dozens of candidates, all with impressive credentials, all saying the right things. And do you know what every single one of them lacked? I shook my head. The capacity for genuine remorse, the ability to acknowledge their mistakes without making excuses, the courage to be vulnerable. Tommy opened the folder again, but instead of looking at my resume, he pulled out a different piece of paper. I've been following your career, David. Not obsessively, but enough to know the broad strokes. Morrison Associates, the promotion to senior VP, the projects you led, the clients you landed, the reputation you built. I stared at him in surprise. You have? I also know about the volunteer work you started doing 3 years ago, the literacy program for underprivileged kids, the mentorship program for first-generation college students. My mouth fell open. I'd never publicized that work, had done it quietly, almost secretively, driven by motivations I'd never fully examined. You've been working with kids who remind you of me, Tommy said with a slight smile. Kids who are smart and ambitious, but don't have the connections or resources to succeed on their own. Kids who need someone to believe in them. He set the paper down, and I could see it was a letter of recommendation from the director of the literacy program. She says you're one of the most dedicated volunteers they've ever had, that you show up every Saturday morning without fail, that you've helped over 100 kids improve their reading scores, that you treat each one of them like they matter. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. How did you? I make it my business to know about potential employees. But this wasn't in your resume, David. Why didn't you mention it? I struggled to find an answer that made sense. I don't know. It didn't seem relevant to the position. Or maybe because you knew it would seem like you were trying to compensate for something, trying to balance the scales for abandoning a friend by helping strangers. The accuracy of his observation hit me like a physical blow. That was exactly what it had been, at least at first. A kind of penance I'd never consciously acknowledged. Was it working? Tommy asked gently. The volunteer work. Did it make you feel better about what happened between us? I considered lying, then realized I'd done enough of that for one lifetime. At first, maybe, but then it became something else. Those kids. They reminded me of who I used to be before I got so caught up in trying to be someone else. They reminded me of you, yes, but also of the part of myself I'd lost. Tommy nodded slowly. The part that cared more about doing the right thing than doing the profitable thing. Yes. The part that understood that success means nothing if you achieve it by stepping on the people who care about you. Yes. Tommy closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since I'd entered the room, he smiled. Not the professional courtesy smile he'd worn during the interview, but something genuine and familiar. I'm going to offer you the position, David. I felt my world tilt on its axis. What? I'm going to offer you the position. Senior Marketing Director, reporting directly to me. The salary is competitive, the benefits are excellent, and the work is challenging. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. Tommy, I don't understand. After everything, you're the person I need for this job, not despite what happened between us, but because of it. He stood up and walked to the window again, his hands clasped behind his back. I told you that broken trust taught me to work alone, and that's true. But it also taught me to recognize genuine remorse when I see it. Most people, when they make mistakes, they make excuses. They blame circumstances or other people or bad timing. They do anything except take full responsibility. Tommy turned back to face me. You didn't make excuses, David. You didn't try to minimize what you did or explain it away. You owned it completely, and that tells me something important about who you've become. I felt overwhelmed, grateful, and terrified all at once. What if I disappoint you again? Then you'll disappoint me again, Tommy said simply. But I don't think you will. The man who spent 3 years volunteering with underprivileged kids isn't the same 17-year-old boy who chose popularity over friendship. He walked back to the table and extended his hand. Besides, he said with a grin that reminded me powerfully of the boy I'd once known, I figure after 25 years, I'm due for a little revenge. And what better revenge than making you work for the friend you abandoned? I laughed despite myself, recognizing both the humor and the deeper truth in his words. I stood up and took his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip and the warmth of genuine forgiveness. Thank you, I said, my voice rough with emotion, for the job, but more importantly, for the second chance. Don't thank me yet, Tommy replied. Wait until you see your first quarterly targets. As we shook hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a man clinging to his last opportunity, but the deeper hope that comes from reconciliation and the possibility of redemption. There is one condition, Tommy said as he released my hand. My heart skipped a beat. What's that? Saturday morning literacy program. I want you to keep doing it, and I want you to recruit other Meridian employees to volunteer. Corporate social responsibility is important to this company. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. I think I can manage that. Tommy gathered up the papers from the interview, sliding them back into the folder. Human Resources will be in touch about the formal offer and start date. We're hoping you can begin as soon as possible. Absolutely. As I moved toward the door, Tommy called my name one more time. David? I turned back to face him. We can't go back, he said quietly. We can't be 17 again, and we can't pretend the last 25 years didn't happen. But maybe we can build something new, something better. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. I'd like that, I managed to say. I'd like that very much. As I left the conference room and walked back toward the elevator, I felt the weight of the last 8 months lifting from my shoulders. I had a job, a real chance to rebuild my career and my life. But more than that, I had something I'd thought was lost forever. The possibility of reclaiming a friendship I'd thrown away in a moment of cowardice and fear. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, watching the floor numbers count down as I descended back to street level. But for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about falling. I was thinking about rising, about second chances, and about the unexpected ways life sometimes allows us to correct our worst mistakes. When I reached the ground floor and stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, I pulled out my phone to call my wife with the good news. But before I dialed, I paused to look back up at the gleaming office tower that housed Meridian Industries. Somewhere up there, 32 floors above the street, was the boy I'd once known better than anyone else in the world. The boy who'd become a man of uncommon grace and wisdom, who'd understood that true strength sometimes means offering forgiveness to those who don't deserve it. I thought about all the years we'd lost, all the conversations that had never happened, all the shared experiences that existed now only in memory. They were gone, irretrievably gone, and nothing could bring them back. But tomorrow I would walk into that building as Tommy Chen's employee. We would work together, building something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. It wouldn't be the same as the friendship we'd shared as children. Too much had happened. Too much time had passed for that kind of innocence to be reclaimed. But maybe, just maybe, it would be something even more valuable. A relationship forged not in the easy camaraderie of childhood, but in the harder-won understanding that comes from forgiveness and the courage to try again. As I dialed my wife's number, I found myself smiling, really smiling for the first time in months. The job was important, the salary was necessary, the career prospects were exciting. But the real gift was simpler and more profound. The chance to discover who I might become if I stopped running from my past and started learning from it instead. The phone rang once, twice, and then my wife's voice came through, warm and familiar and full of hope. David, how did it go? It went well, I said, watching the afternoon sunlight reflect off the windows of Meridian Industries. It went very well indeed.